There's a type of person you probably know. Maybe it's you. That person who, when receiving an invitation to a big party, a packed concert, or an event with hundreds of people, feels something strange forming in their chest. It's not exactly fear. It's not necessarily anxiety. It's something deeper, more instinctive. It's an internal voice that simply says, "I'd rather not be there." For centuries, humanity has celebrated mass gatherings. Packed Roman colosseums, public squares teeming with life, festivals that attract millions. Society teaches us that being among many is being alive, being part of something greater. But what about those who feel the opposite? Those for whom a crowded room isn't energy, but exhaustion? Those who find peace not in the crowd, but in the silence of the few? This is not a documentary about antisocial or lonely people. This is a documentary about a deep and often misunderstood human characteristic. It's about the psychology of those who don't like crowds, about the science behind this preference, and about what it really means in a world that seems to increasingly value the noisy collective. If you're watching right now, I'd like to make a simple request. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming documentaries, and leave in the comments, what time is it where you are? I want to know if you're watching this in the morning, afternoon, or in the calm of night. Let's begin this journey together. The first thing we need to understand is that avoiding crowds is not a character flaw. It's not weakness. It's not immaturity. It is, in fact, a complex psychological response that has roots in both our biology and our life experience. When we look at the human brain, we discover something fascinating. Not all brains process social stimuli in the same way. Imagine you're in a subway station during rush hour. Hundreds of people are moving around you. Sounds echo off concrete walls. Someone is talking on their phone too loudly. A group of teenagers laughs nonstop. The smell of coffee mixes with perfume, with sweat, with the metallic odor of the rails. For some people, this is just the way home. For others, each of these elements is a signal that needs to be processed, analyzed, managed by the brain. Neuroscience shows us that people with high sensory sensitivity have nervous systems that process information more deeply. It's not that they choose to pay attention to everything. It's that their brain simply captures more data from the environment. And crowds are, essentially, explosions of sensory data. Each face is information. Each conversation in the background is an auditory stimulus. Each movement in the periphery of vision is something the brain registers. This leads us to an important concept: stimulus overload. Think of your brain as a computer processing information. When you're alone or with few people, the processing is smooth. But put that computer in a room with 1,000 simultaneous sources of information, and something interesting happens. The system begins to get overloaded. And when that happens, the brain activates its protective responses. Some of these responses are obvious: irritability, fatigue, the urge to leave. Others are more subtle: a sense of disconnection, as if you were observing everything through glass. A mental fog that makes it difficult to form clear thoughts. A fatigue that doesn't come from the body, but from the mind. And here's what most people don't understand: this isn't a choice. You can't simply decide not to feel this, any more than you can decide not to feel hunger. But there's another layer to this story. It's not just sensory stimuli. It's also social stimuli. In a crowd, you're not just surrounded by bodies. You're surrounded by emotional energies, by implicit social expectations, by micro-interactions happening every second. And for some people, especially those with introverted tendencies, this is mentally exhausting. Introversion is often misinterpreted. People think introverts are shy, that they're afraid of socializing, that they don't like people. This isn't true. Introversion, in modern psychology, refers to how you process and recover energy. Extroverts gain energy from social interactions. Introverts spend energy in social interactions, even when they enjoy them. It's like the difference between charging a battery and draining it. Now imagine being at a party with 100 people. For an introvert, this isn't just noise and movement. It's 100 potential interactions. It's the constant need to be on, socially. It's performing, smiling, answering questions, maintaining superficial conversations, reading facial expressions, interpreting tones of voice. It's intense and constant mental work. And after a few hours, the battery is completely empty. But there's something even deeper happening here. Something that connects this aversion to crowds with our evolutionary past. For millions of years, humans lived in small groups. Tribes of 20, 30, maybe 50 individuals. These were manageable numbers. You knew each person. You understood your position in the group. You knew who was an ally and who represented a threat. Your brain evolved to operate at this scale. Megacities are a recent invention in human history. Just 200 years ago, most people never saw more than a few hundred individuals during their entire lives. Today, you can see more people in a single subway ride than your ancestors saw in a decade. And the human brain, this ancient and complex organ, is still trying to adapt. For some people, this adaptation is more difficult. Not because they're weak or evolutionarily inferior, but because they retain characteristics that were, in fact, advantages in the past. Caution around large groups of strangers. Preference for predictable and controllable environments. The ability to function well with limited distributed attention resources. These were survival characteristics. Think of the hunter who needed to be hyper-focused, who couldn't afford multiple distractions. Or the observer who noticed subtle details that others missed because they weren't overloaded by constant social stimuli. These individuals had immense value to the tribe. And these traits still exist today, expressed in different ways in a different world. Now let's talk about something that's rarely discussed, the shame associated with not liking crowds. We live in a culture that glorifies the extrovert. Networking, being present, being seen. People who shine at parties, who accumulate contacts, who seem energized by social events are seen as successful, charismatic, important. And those who prefer the opposite? They're often seen as strange. This cultural pressure creates a challenging pattern. The person who doesn't like crowds forces themselves to attend large events. They feel exhausted and uncomfortable. They interpret these feelings as personal failures. They develop anxiety not just about crowds, but about their own response to crowds. And then avoidance intensifies, not from natural preference, but from apprehension about the emotional discomfort and self-criticism that may arise. Here's a fundamental truth: preferring calmer environments and smaller groups is not pathology. It's normal human variation. Just as some people prefer mountains and others prefer beaches, some people thrive in large groups and others thrive in small circles. The problem isn't the preference. The problem is when society invalidates a natural preference and transforms it into shame. But there are cases where aversion to crowds crosses the line from preference to disorder. Agoraphobia, for example, is a real condition where fear of crowds and public spaces becomes debilitating. The crucial difference is this: a person with a natural aversion to crowds can avoid them, but when necessary, can navigate through them, albeit with discomfort. A person with agoraphobia feels genuine panic, intense physical symptoms, and avoidance begins to severely limit their life. It's important to make this distinction because, unfortunately, every preference for solitude or small groups is sometimes pathologized. A young person who prefers to stay home reading instead of going to a party doesn't necessarily have a social anxiety problem. They may simply be someone who values quality time with themselves. The key is asking, is this preference enriching my life or limiting it against my will? Let's now explore a fascinating aspect: what really happens psychologically in a crowd. There's a phenomenon that's been studied for over a century called crowd psychology. When you put many people together, something curious occurs. Individualities begin to dissolve. People become part of a collective entity, and this entity has its own psychology, distinct from the individuals who compose it. In crowds, inhibitions decrease. The sense of individual responsibility dilutes. Emotions become contagious, spreading from person to person like waves. That's why you can have thousands of people laughing at the same time at a comedy show, or thousands crying together at a collective funeral. This emotional synchronization is powerful and, for many, exciting. But for others, it's deeply uncomfortable. Because it involves a loss of control. When you're in a crowd, you're no longer completely in command of your experience. You can be physically pushed by the mass of bodies. You can be carried by the emotional wave, feeling things you didn't choose to feel. You can lose your sense of individuality, becoming just another face among thousands. And for people who value autonomy and self-control, this is inherently threatening. There's also the question of vulnerability. In a crowd, you're exposed. You can't monitor all the people around you. You can't predict behaviors. You can't leave quickly if you need to. This vulnerability triggers primitive alert systems in the brain, especially in people with heightened sensitivity to potential threats. And again, this isn't irrational paranoia. It's the survival system doing its job, perhaps with more intensity than the modern situation requires. But here's a perspective that can change everything. What if not liking crowds is, in fact, a form of wisdom? What if it's your internal system saying you function better in other ways? We live in an era of obsessive productivity, where everyone must maximize every moment, be constantly connected, always available. But quality of life doesn't come from quantity of connections. It comes from depth. People who prefer small groups often develop deeper and more meaningful relationships. They invest real time in a few people, instead of spreading superficial attention across many. They create mental spaces for reflection, creativity, and personal growth that are impossible to achieve in constant social stimulation. They learn to be comfortable with themselves, a skill that most people in the modern era have lost. There's a quiet power in knowing your limits and respecting them. In saying no to the event everyone's attending because you know it will drain you. In choosing an intimate dinner with 3 friends instead of a party with 30 acquaintances. In realizing you don't need to be where everyone is to have a full and rich life. This isn't evasion. It's self-knowledge. And perhaps this is what the modern world most needs to learn. Not all spaces should be optimized for the extrovert. Not every valuable experience needs to involve dozens or hundreds of people. There's beauty and purpose in the small, the quiet, the contained. There's wisdom in recognizing that less can be more, that intimacy surpasses quantity, that depth matters more than breadth. For those who don't like crowds, here's what I want you to understand. You're not broken. You don't need to be fixed. Your brain isn't defective for processing the world differently. You simply have a nervous system that functions better under certain conditions, and honoring these conditions isn't weakness. It's emotional intelligence. At the same time, it's important not to let preferences become prisons. If you avoid crowds out of genuine fear, if your life is becoming smaller because you can't be in certain spaces, then perhaps it's time to seek support. Cognitive behavioral therapy, gradual exposure techniques, mindfulness practices, all these tools can help expand your comfort zone without forcing you to be someone you're not. The goal isn't to become comfortable in any situation. The goal is to have choice. To be able to go to the big event when it really matters to you, even if it's uncomfortable. To be able to decline without guilt when it doesn't matter. To have the freedom to navigate the world according to your values and needs, not according to external expectations or internal limitations you no longer want to carry. In the end, human diversity is one of our greatest strengths as a species. We need the deep thinkers who process information intensely. We need the sensitive observers who notice what others miss. We need those who build small and strong communities, not just broad and superficial networks. And we need to understand that there's no right way to be human. The world is full of noise. It's full of rush and crowds and constant demand for attention. Amid all this, there's something revolutionary about a person who says, I don't need to be everywhere. I can choose quality over quantity. I can honor my needs without apologizing. And I can build a meaningful life on my own terms, even if those terms don't include being at the center of the crowd. If you're someone who prefers quiet spaces, small gatherings, moments of solitude, know this. You're part of a long lineage of thinkers, artists, scientists, and visionaries who found their power not in the noise of the masses, but in the silence of reflection. You're in good company. And the world needs what only you, in your particular way of being, can offer. May we all find the spaces where we belong. May we respect the differences in how each of us navigates this complex world. And may we build a society that celebrates not only those who shine in crowds, but also those who shine in quietness. Because both are necessary, both are valuable, and both reflect the infinite diversity of human experience. May the Lord God guide us to understand and accept ourselves and others in all our different ways of existing in this world. And may we find peace not in being the same, but in being authentically who we are.